Mary Beth, about 2 years ago, I remember reading an article about Social Security diving into the same worry that so many people have, which is it's going to run out. And I believe it's still the most popular video I've ever done on YouTube. And it's really just about it because there's just such worry about what's going to happen with Social Security. And then let's start with the confusion around Social Security. There's just so many ways to look at doing Social Security the right way, the wrong way. Do I wait? Do I start? When do I start? Maybe let's just start with a history lesson of Social Security and what it was originally set up to do.
Well, Social Security has been around for more than 80 years. And frankly, this was one of the big projects that came out of Franklin Delano Roosevelt's New Deal. We were coming out of the Great Depression. There was enormous unemployment. And basically, they were looking for ways to get old people out of the workforce to free up jobs for young people. But there really was no universal retirement system. And by creating Social Security, which was always looked at as an earned benefit in the sense that a portion of your payroll was being taxed to fund your future Social Security benefit, and that portion would be matched on the employer as well. Now, in the very beginning of this system, which was signed into law in 1935, great deal for those people who were the early beneficiaries. They may have only paid into the system for a couple years and was getting benefits for the rest of their lives. It is a pay as you go system,
But the original folks, so wait, I did not know this. So
right?
every time, so I always thought that because the depression was such a terrible time economically, it was the wake up call that we needed some sort of social safety net, and I'm sure that's part of it. But it's very interesting to hear that economically we were in a position where you just you the part of this was then to say, hey, if you're a senior, somebody senior at a company, we want you to give you an incentive to leave so we can get young people and get unemployment down. That was a big part of it.
Right. There
That's
was
amazing. I didn't know that.
let's get younger people into the workforce. Many of those people who did not have jobs during the depression, and older workers were hanging in there because they had no other source of income. Their, pensions were not widespread. So this created, I believe, FDR said that people could retire with dignity. It was never
Mhm.
designed to be the sole source of your retirement income, but it would give a base. And
And
so,
so that base early on, first of all, there's a lot of factors that got us out of a depressionary period of time. Then we went into the war.
yeah,
However,
World War II helped a lot.
it helped a lot. But those early folks got Social Security, even if they may have only been working, maybe. I guess what was that based on? That's fascinating to me. So,
Well, if for someone who wanted to explore it, I wish I could remember all the details, but if you go to the Social Security website, ssa.gov, there's a tab called History, and you can read about the history of the Social Security program. And there, I cannot remember the name of the woman, but she was the first retirement beneficiary. I used to know her name. But she basically put in $22 and change in her lifetime contributions and received over $100,000 in benefits over her lifetime. She lived to a ripe old age. I believe she was in her 90s. The thing to keep in mind is for a for a program that is so important to American retirees, most of us do not understand anything about how this program works. All we know is somebody named Mr. FICA is taking money out of our paycheck every week, and I guess that's going to be my Social Security benefit. A lot of people think that, okay, you're taking this money out of my paycheck, and someplace in the ether is a savings account with my name with my future Social Security benefit. No, your current payroll taxes, your FICA taxes, are not funding your benefit tomorrow. They're funding your parents' and your grandparents' benefits today. It's reliant on current workers funding the benefits of current retirees. And that's why this idea of it's paying as you go system. And I want to allay people's fears when they hear the system's going broke. The system's not going broke. In a worst case scenario, if Congress did nothing between now and approximately 2034, when the excess money that we call the trust funds run out, there would still be enough money from ongoing FICA taxes to pay about 80% of promised benefits. Now, nobody is going to be satisfied with 80% of promised benefits, but Congress isn't crazy. They're going to fix this because old people vote,
They
and they're going
do.
to make sure that this gets fixed.
And so I want to circle back to that just a minute, but the reality here is that there are, so it started in the mid 30s, and then there's been changes along the way, and life expectancy, just demographic changes, the wealth of our country, the thought of life expectancy has obviously been a big piece of the equation, and then the range of when you can take it, the 62 to maybe to then now full retirement age was 66, and now it's 67, and that continues to change. So there are all these variables, and I guess my question would be, what is the most complicated part of this? Why are Americans, oh, again, we get the, I heard this over and over again, we get the most, and I know that one of the interviews you did, the most questions from the audience was for you because Social Security is the biggest topic and it's the most confusing. And on, I we get tons of Social Security questions all the time, and there was just a change a couple of years ago. What what is so confusing about Social Security to begin with?
Well, there are more than 2,700 rules that govern your Social Security benefits. Part of the problem is it started as a simple retirement program in the 1930s. And in the beginning, it was just for retired workers. There was no benefit for spouses. There were no benefits for dependents. There was no disability benefits. These things have been added on along the way. And much like the tax code, when you add a level of complexity, um, often existing beneficiaries are grandfathered under the old rules, and then the new rules will apply to people going forward. So we have all of these regulations right on top of the other. And that's what makes it so confusing. You made a reference to changes a few years ago. Back in 2015, Congress was dealing with overarching federal debt ceiling legislation, had nothing to do with Social Security. But while they were there, they tacked on two amendments that changed the way some people were able to claim their benefits. And in one instance, they said this one claiming strategy is going away in 6 months. You have to be at least 62 years old by April 2016, or you're out of luck. The other one, they said, well, we're going to phase this in, and as long as you're born before 1954, you can do XYZ. And then new rules apply to new people. You can see where this is really confusing. And I took great exception to this legislation because of the short time frame for implementing it.
Right, it was
As
only
of
like a 6 month window. I remember that period of
right.
time, getting
And
people kind of under the wire for
right.
the new rules.
And the fact that so many people had planned to implement these strategies and suddenly found out they couldn't. An example, I think, of good public policy is if you go back to 1983, the last time we had comprehensive Social Security reform, where they did things like gradually raise the full retirement age, which was 65 at the time, and will ultimately become 67 over a 40-year period. That 67 applies to people born in 1960 or later and will not be fully implemented till 2027. You give the American public 40 years to get used to something, they can adapt. They're not so good when you give them 6 months.
I know it's such a good point. So, and I'm going to skip to something I wanted to ask you later, but I'm going to skip to it right now. Is that if you had to, and then we'll get to spousal. I want to talk about spousal benefits because it's a big consideration for Social Security benefits. But if let's go back for a second, and if we were to almost start the show on this note, how would you describe? So if you had to, which again, 2,700 rules, uh, multiple legislative changes over the last, call it 70 to 80 years. 90 years, how would you describe Social Security and the claiming strategy of Social Security? So, I'm talking to a 60-year-old couple, and you say, look, in the next few years, here's what you should do. But if you had to describe it in like a sentence or two, or maybe three.
I would say for most Americans, it is the only source of guaranteed income for the rest of your life, no matter how long you live. Taking this in the context of pensions are history for most people, unless they're working for a federal or state government at this point. Yes, there are current retirees that still have traditional pensions, but as we move forward and baby boomers and Gen Xers start to retire, the access to pensions significantly reduced. Now, people have this image of the golden age of pensions. Well, once upon a time, 100% of people have pensions. No, that never happened.
Mm-hmm.
At most, you're talking 30-40% of
Right. I think it was
people.
like, yeah, the max was like 41% of
Right.
companies. Yeah.
And that was in the heydays of the 1980s. And people say, well, what happened to pensions? Well, in the old days, when you had companies like GE and IBM and these legacy companies and car manufacturers, the big three car manufacturers, this was an employee benefit, and people stayed their whole life at one company. They put their time in, the company put money for their future retirement, and that was their pension.
By the way, the olden days. That's what my kids say. They're like, Dad, in the olden days when
In
you
the
were a kid,
olden, yes, the
the
olden
olden
golden
days.
days, right. But a lot of things happened, and the biggest thing, frankly, was global competition. When you suddenly had IBM, a US based company, competing with Japanese and Korean companies making similar products that didn't have these legacy costs. Same thing happened to car companies. They had international competition that weren't dealing with these costs. At one point, they used to joke that GM was basically an HMO, a health maintenance organization
Right.
on four wheels. Those employee benefits, including pensions, got so expensive that the companies, to maintain international competitiveness, had to scale back. And that's when we see switching to the 401k, which meant the employees had to contribute and take the risk. And suddenly, retirement wasn't secure anymore.
So again, I think your fundamental baseline description of Social Security, which is, I'm going to pull this word out that you said, is that it is the only guaranteed thing that you will have in the future as long as you have some sort of Social Security benefit, right? So that's
Right.
the one piece. The next sentence I would ask you to distill this down in is this: is are you in the camp of take social as soon as you get it, or you can get it, or should you wait as long as you can in order to take it?
It's a very personal decision based on your health and your wealth. I tell people the idea of delaying benefits up until age 70 for people who are healthy enough to wait, because it's a bit like the lottery. You must be present to win. If you're not going to make it into your early 80s, it may not be a good choice. And wealthy enough. Okay, you're choosing to delay to get this huge payoff, an extra 8% per year between your full retirement age and 70. What do you do for money in between? If you're one of those baby boomers who say, well, I'm going to work forever, problem solved. You have income from a job. But there are many people who could still retire at 62 or 66 and still choose to delay Social Security to 70 to get that big payoff if they have other sources of income. And I'll make two comments on that. The idea of delaying up until age 70, I think, is critically important for married couples for one spouse to delay if possible. And
Okay, so go
that's
into. So I was going to ask you about Social Security strategies on spouses. So let's go into that as an example.
right,
So
because
what you want one spouse. So rather than, this is a good way to look at this. And again, let me again back up to remind you that we are the Retire Sooner podcast is a group of folks that are trying to get to retirement before 62.
mhm,
This group is targeting their mid 50s, their early 60s, and they may be our listeners may be 30 today, and
mhm,
we're
mhm.
talking about the future of social, but also we're saying if I'm eyeing, I've got enough, I've saved a fair amount of money, and then I have the decision to take Social Security early or not. We'll come back to that. But
Hmm.
to your point, the huge piece of the equation is your spouse and
Absolutely.
spousal benefits. So talk that through. You want one to wait all the way till 70 and one to maybe take it earlier? Explain that.
Right. Because when you have a married couple, and let's say the husband and wife each have their own earnings record, and consequently, they each have their own retirement benefit, when one of them dies, the larger benefit is going to continue as the survivor benefit. So I don't think both spouses need to delay. And I will make the distinction, my audience tends to be either in retirement or closer to retirement than
Okay.
your audience. And we can debate where these strategies are appropriate for your younger audience or not. But if I'm dealing with someone close to retirement, it makes sense for the spouse with the bigger Social Security benefit. I'm going to say the husband, not always the case, and often in couples of this age near or in retirement, the husband statistically tends to be a couple years older.
That's
It
so
makes
true.
sense for him to delay till 70, maximizing not only his retirement benefit while they're both alive, but he's also statistically likely to die first. So instead of getting $2,400 a month at 66, he might get 3,000 and change. He dies. That's what his wife steps up to as the survivor benefit.
Regardless of whether of her benefit, she could.
If it's bigger than her benefit.
Right.
So, and having said, all right, let's have the husband wait till 70, I then say the spouse with the smaller benefit, the wife in this case, may want to go ahead and claim her Social Security early at 62 if she's not working, because there's earnings restrictions if you claim before full retirement age. My rationale for that is bring some cash flow into the household now to help take the sting away from the husband waiting till 70. And here's something most people don't understand: even though the wife is claiming her own retirement benefit early at 62, and her own retirement benefit is now going to be reduced by 25% for the rest of her life, it has no impact on her survivor benefit. If she is at least full retirement age when she is widowed, she can then switch to full survivor benefits, 100% of what her husband was receiving when he died. No
For
downside for
example,
that.
and this is where things can get a little bit complicated, but if someone listening is in their 60s and they're making these decisions, and the husband, let's say, same scenario, he's going to wait. His social, let's say, is going to be 3,200 a month. Wife is saying, or wife's social might only be 1,800 a month, let's just say, and she chooses to take that. She can no longer, or the second spouse can no longer jump to at least. Well, I take it back. The second spouse can get at least half of what the higher earning or higher Social Security spouse would get. Correct.
Right. That a spousal benefit is worth up to 50% of the worker's full retirement age benefit. Even if he waits till 70, her spousal benefit would still be worth half of his age 66 benefit.
Right. Even though he's not taking it.
Well, under the new rules, he'd actually have to take a benefit to trigger a benefit for her. So, in the example I gave you, she has her own retirement benefit, he has his own retirement benefit. She's going to claim her reduced benefit early, bring money into the household. He's going to wait till 70. Now, once he claims at 70, it's possible she may step up to a larger benefit. You'd have to see how those numbers work out.
So, because of all these issues here, you think about the big. Well, what are the top variables? You've got your age, uh, your
Marital
health.
status, your health, and if you need the money, what's your financial situation? There are people who maybe had planned to wait till 70, and during the pandemic, they either lost their job or because of their health, they were afraid to go back to work, so they retired early. Well, suddenly, they may need to claim Social Security right now. And the bottom line is if you need the money, go ahead and take it. You
If
have
you need
worked.
it, go ahead and take it.
Yeah,
Need
absolutely.
it, go ahead and take it. The
And you may be able to undo that decision later. There are some reset buttons in the Social Security system.
Well, I remember there used to, again, this is why it's so confusing. There used to be a way where you could take it, and then if you wanted to give it all back, you could then refile for a higher amount.
Yes,
I don't
and
know
that
what did they
rule,
even call that? What was that?
that's when you withdraw your application for benefits. You can still do it, but it can only be within the first 12 months of receiving benefits, and you can only do it once in your lifetime.
Oh, that's right. Okay, so and give us that example. That's interesting. So tell me why you would want to do that.
Okay, so let's say I'm 62 years old. I had planned to work till 66 or 70, and during the pandemic, I lost my job. I need money. I went ahead and claimed my benefit at 62. So instead of getting 100% of my benefit, I got 75% of my benefit. And now, 9 months later, I got another job. Well, gee, I really wish I had held off on that. Because I'm within the first 12 months of claiming, I can contact Social Security and say, hey, I want to withdraw my application. But the catch is, I have to pay back
Give it
anything
back.
they paid
Give it
me,
back. That's
give it
fine.
back. I don't owe any interest or anything. I just give them back the money they paid me so that at a later date, when I'm older and my benefit would be worth more because I'm older, I start as if for the first time at that higher rate. So
Mm.
that's one do over option. And then there's another that if your head hasn't exploded yet, I'll give you the other.
Yes, I love that. That's actually pretty understandable. That makes a lot of sense, and I think that that's important for people to know. I love that.
Okay, the second one, the second reset,
Do over two. Do over
do
reset
over
two.
two, is called suspending your benefits. Now, to suspend your benefits, you have to be at least full retirement age or older. And at that point, the checks you have been receiving, I say checks, they're actually direct deposits.
Right.
The
It's
money
direct.
you have been receiving from Social Security stops. But it's now starts earning those delayed retirement credits. And so it starts growing
Hmm.
and up until age 70. So let me give you an example of how that would work and who I would suggest using this. And the good thing about suspending your benefits is you don't have to pay anything back. Your checks stop and now they start earning delayed retirement credits. So let's say we have a husband and wife. The husband collected benefits at 62 because he thought, hey, why not? A lot of people think it's my money. I can get it at 62. I'm grabbing it now. So he takes his benefits at 62. They're reduced by 25% because he's claiming 4 years early. But it never occurred to him that if he claimed his retirement benefits early and they're reduced and he dies first, now his widow is going to get a smaller benefit
Hmm.
because a survivor benefit in general, and of course there's exceptions, is worth up to 100% of what the deceased worker was collecting at time of death. So he may want to wait until his full retirement age is 66 and say, let me suspend my benefits. So those benefits are going to stop. Now he needs money from someplace else, but his benefit stops. Now they grow by 8% a year. So the math works like this. Instead of taking 100% at his full retirement age of 66, he took 75% at 62. He takes that for 4 years, he suspends his benefits, they stop. Now they grow by 8% a year. That's 32% over 4 years. If I multiply the 75% he took originally times 1.32, I come out with 99%. He has effectively restored his full retirement age benefit by age 70. And now, if he dies, that's what his widow's going to get.
Whoa, I like that. That's it. You made it actually sound pretty simple. That these are two do-over strategies. The one's real simple. Hey, I'm just going to pay the money back and it's going to continue to grow and you don't have to be the full age to do
Right?
that.
It
The
has to be
second
within 12 months of
within
first
12
claiming.
months. The second do-over is if you took it a little too early, you look up and you say, I'd really like my benefit to grow from my spouse. Then when you hit full retirement age, you can suspend and it will continue to grow.
Right,
Do over option number two.
right. And the
This is
one caveat,
advanced Social Security planning, by the way.
this is advanced Social Security. And the thing to keep in mind is, let's say you've got a husband and wife, the scenario we just went through. His benefits stop. As long as she was collecting her own benefits, she's good. But if she was one of these stay at home wives, she took care of the kids, she wasn't in the workforce, Her only benefit is as a spouse. If
So
his
hers would stop
benefit
too.
stops, hers would stop too.
Okay.
And the other exception, and these are always my favorite, that does not apply to divorced spouses. So if you suspend your benefits and you've got an ex wife who's collecting on your record, it does not affect her benefits, but it would affect your current wife's benefits.
So again, I'm just thinking of questions our listeners might have popping up in their heads as they're listening to you. Let's just say you are divorced, your spouse is 65 and hasn't taken Social Security yet, not at full retirement age, and you're 62, but you'd like to turn on the clock and you haven't been remarried. Are you able to do that, or do you have to wait till your ex spouse was taking social?
Well, let me give you the basics on Social Security. And I, again, this is my favorite part. And I say this having been married 43 years myself. It doesn't apply
I
to
almost
me.
thought you were going to say four
Four
times.
times. No, no,
I've been
no.
married for four different times, so I know these rules like the back of my hand.
I have been married 43 years to the same person, but I have two best friends that were each married 9.5 years, not realizing that to get benefits as an ex spouse, you must be married at least 10 years. You're
Ooh.
1 day shy of that 10 years, you get squat. So here's the rule to remember. If you remember nothing else from this conversation, there must be at least a decade between I do and I don't. If your marriage is falling apart in years 8 and 9, string out the paperwork, because the only dates that marry are the date you're married and the day of your final divorce decree.
Now, it doesn't necessarily have anything to do. So the spousal benefit, if you're divorced, and let's flip the example here because we always use husband, older wife. Let's just say wife is the husband is now wanting to claim on the wife. They were divorced for 10 years, or they were married for 10 years and a day. She has Social Security of 2,500 a month. She hasn't even started it yet, and he'd like to go ahead and start claiming his benefit. Can he do that?
Well, again, we got to back up a little bit because of these rule changes Congress did a few years ago. It used to be you could, once you got to full retirement age, you could say, either based on your currently married spouse or your ex spouse, if you had been married at least 10 years before divorcing, it used to be when you got to your full retirement age, you could say, don't pay me my Social Security benefit. Let it keep growing by 8% a year up until age 70. In the meantime, pay me only as a spouse. Give me 50% of my husband's benefit. Give me 50% of my wife's benefit. Well, now, the only people who can do that are people born before 1954.
54. Yeah, that's yeah.
And for a currently married couple, the one spouse actually has to claim Social Security to trigger these spousal benefits for the other one. In a divorce spouse situation, it's different because you can imagine if you had a really
That's not a
nasty
conversation
divorce.
with your ex. Hey, I
Right,
really
yeah.
need the money. Can you
Really need the
please start
money.
social? Well, now that you asked, I think I'll wait. Yeah.
Right. In other words, Congress thought if you have a nasty divorce and one ex says to the other, I am never going to retire and you are never going to get a dime of
Hmm.
my Social Security, Congress thought that might be a problem. So they added another exception that in addition to being married at least 10 years, divorced, and currently single, if you have been divorced at least 2 years and you are both at least 62 years old, you can collect on your ex even if your ex has not yet claimed. You are an independently entitled spouse.
Hmm.
But now they've layered these other new rules on it.
Keep them going. These are
You
great.
can only claim as a spouse only if you're born before 1954.
Okay.
So
So
here's an example. You've got two ex spouses. They're both 68 years old. He hasn't claimed yet, neither is she. Because she's 68 this year, she's born before that 1954 cutoff. She could go ahead and say to Social Security, I
let's go.
want to collect spousal benefits only on my ex while my own benefits keep growing till 70. He doesn't even need to know about it, and it
Mhm.
does not affect his benefits. It does not take away from his benefits. If he remarried, it doesn't take away from his new wife. She is the ex-wife is an independently entitled spouse.
All right, I'm going to layer this on one more time. Two ex-spouses, you've married both of them for 10 years. Can you choose the higher payment on one of the two, or is it the most recent one only?
Highest of the two. And let me give you an example. I always use this example of how crazy these rules are. And you said, how did it get to be so complicated? As these changes, they keep getting layered on top of each other. So we have a couple, John and Mary. They are married 10 years. They get divorced. Mary remains single. Then John marries his secretary, Susie. They're married for 10 years. They get divorced. Susie remains single. John doesn't like to be alone, goes to the local pub, and he meets Tiffany. Tiffany's 30 years old. They fall madly in love and get married. Now they have a little boy, Johnny. Johnny's 2 years old, and Big John drops dead. Who gets benefits?
Wow. Okay. How old is little Johnny?
Two.
Wow. Tiffany?
Everybody gets
All three.
benefits. All
Mary?
four.
All four. So
Mary is married at least 10 years, divorced and currently single. She gets 100% of John's survivor benefit.
even if he hadn't been taking social?
Yep.
Got
Yep.
it. Oh, his now right his
Assuming she's old enough, you have to be at least 62 to get a retirement benefit and 60 to get a survivor benefit.
but even
So,
if John weren't taking his social, it's whatever it would have been at the upon his death.
correct.
Upon his death.
Correct.
Okay. So it would be Mary
Gets
and
100%. Susie gets 100% because she was married at least 10 years, divorced and currently single. Little Johnny, as a minor dependent surviving child, gets 75% every month until he turns 18.
18, yeah.
And his 32-year-old mother also gets 75% every month until Johnny turns 16.
So so
So if
that
you worry about the long-term financing of Social Security, less to do with trust funds, more to do with divorce.
that's awesome. All right. So Mary, Susie, Tiffany, and Johnny, little Johnny, all that's a scenario where Social Security kind of loses out.
Right. You call it the Johnny Carson rule.
Johnny Carson rule. I like that. The now, if the negation of that is if let's say Susie, wife number two, had gotten remarried, she can no longer. If she's married, she can't claim on Johnny.
She can't collect on a living ex, but here's another exception. If you wait till 60 or older to remarry, you can collect on a dead ex.
But obviously not on both.
No, only the higher of the two.
Higher the two.
So here's
Wow.
another quick thing to remember. A spousal benefit while your spouse or ex is alive is worth up to 50%. A survivor benefit when they die is 100%. So your ex is worth twice as much dead than alive. But you probably knew that anyway, right?
Oh my! I feel like we're this has become an episode of Deal or No Deal, Social Security Deal or No Deal, with Mary Beth Franklin. I knew we'd figure out a way to make this fascinating because it is. It's once you start applying it to the real world, Social Security goes from so confusing, I don't want to deal with it, to oh wow, that's pretty interesting. It's a little soap opera, which is
Yeah.
interesting. Um, the All right, so let's just go back to the real world. Here's a pretty common scenario that people want to know is that they're 62, they love to take social, but they still know that they need to save for retirement, so they really are going to keep working. Let's talk about getting Social Security and working. What are the provisions on you not getting penalized, but also being able to work at the same time? And which scenario doesn't make sense? If you're working at 63 and you're making 200,000 a year, is it silly to take even to be getting social because it all gets canceled out? Let's talk
It's
that through.
basically impossible. Yeah. The the idea is Social Security was designed to replace income you lost when you stopped working.
Hmm.
So in theory, you could start collecting as early as age 62. It's reduced because you're collecting it early, but there's an earnings restriction, which is about $19,000 this year. If you earn more than that, Social Security is going to withhold $1 in benefits for every two you earn over that limit. So basically, multiplied by three. It means if you make about $58,000 a year, you're going to lose all your benefits. temporarily. The way it works is once you get to your full retirement age, Social Security is going to review your earnings record and say, okay, Mr. Johnson, we see you claimed your benefit at 62 and we cut them by 25%. But I also see that over the past 4 years, you've been working and you forfeited 24 months worth of benefits over that time, 2 years worth of benefits. So now that you have reached full retirement age, we're going to pretend as if you claimed at 64 instead of 62. We're going to add back those 24 months of benefits you gave up. So
Hmm.
going forward, you're going to get a larger monthly benefits. So if you claim early and you lose benefits due to excess earnings, you will eventually get them back once you reach full retirement age in the form of higher monthly benefits. But it's an accounting nightmare. For example, you're 62, you decide to claim early. Social Security is going to ask you, so do you plan to keep working? And a lot of people say, "Ah, gee, no, I just won't tell them I'm working." Well, they talk to the IRS. It may take 2 or 3 years, but then you'll get a letter in the mail saying, hey, Mr. Johnson, looks like we overpaid you by $33,000. We'd like that back right now in a lump sum. Do you
Oh, I've never.
really?
You know what? That's a good. So Social Security can come back.
Oh yeah. You if they paid you more benefits than you were entitled to because of your earnings, you need to give that money back. And
So
if
yeah,
you
you don't want to mess
you
with
don't
Social
want to do
Security
that.
and the rules.
No, no. So my number one rule is if you plan to keep working, don't collect benefits before full retirement age. It's not worth
Simple.
it.
That's
But
simple.
say you retire at 62 and you're working part time and make $15,000 a year. Yeah,
Sure.
sure. Go ahead if you want. You're under the earnings cap.
Speaking of, where do you go? Do you? I know that there's always talk of going to the Social Security office, calling Social Security on the phone to try to get some nuanced advice for this. Where do you come down on? Would you ever recommend anybody actually go to the Social Security office and ask them a question?
First of all, COVID 19, those offices have been closed since March 2020. There is no face to face public meeting with Social Security reps for the foreseeable future. The only way you can contact them is either online to apply for benefits or by phone. Um, I the Social Security administration job is not to tell you when to claim your benefits. That's your decision, and you should be consulting with your financial advisor, your accountant, do some online calculations, read AARP, read me, read my book, whatever. The Social Security's job is to process your application. And the way there's more than 60,000 Social Security reps, hard working people, incredibly overworked during all of this. And many of them have been there for 30 years or more and tend to think in a very old school way of grab it as soon as you can.
Hmm.
And and when asked, they will often tell you to grab it as soon as you can. Things have changed over the past decade, mainly because of this 8% per year delayed retirement
Did
credit.
it not used to be that I?
Let me
When
tell
did
you a
that come
story.
into effect? See, it feels like it's been that way for a long time. It's not. It's not though.
In 1983, when I was a very young reporter for United Press International covering the Social Security reform, it was headed by a guy that we all know his name now, Alan Greenspan. But this was long before he was chairman of the Federal Reserve Board. He chaired the Bipartisan Commission on Social Security Reform. And they did a lot of smart things back then. And one of the questions they raised was, Americans are living so much longer, but everybody is collecting benefits at 62. What can we do to get people to delay collecting their benefits when they're worth more? Well, the problem was back in 1983, those delayed retirement credits that I've been talking about, they were not 8% a year. They were 3% a year.
It wasn't a huge incentive to wait.
And the problem was in 1983, interest rates were 18%. Why, in your right mind, would you delay claiming for 3% when you could stick your money in the bank and get 18%?
Come on, Greenspan. Greenspan should have known better than that. That wasn't an
Well, that
incentive.
that was the law he inherited. He was the one who raised the question, what can we do to incentivize people to delay. So this 18-member bipartisan commission came up with a great idea. Okay, let's increase the delayed retirement credits. Let's gradually increase them by 5%, half a percent each year until we get to a certain point, and we'll cap it off at 8%. Yeah, 8%. It sounded, that was minuscule in 1983. The 8% a year took full effect for people who were born in 1943 or later, when they reached their full retirement age of 66. 1943 plus 66, 2009.
So it's
First year
only
we had.
been since '09 that you get the full 8%.
And what happened in 2009? At the
The,
time, it was the worst stock market
yeah.
crash since the Great Depression, and suddenly the government was going to pay you 8% a year to wait. That's why this discussion of delayed retirement credits has become such a big deal over the last few decades. It wasn't always like this. The other thing, the idea of coordinating spousal claiming strategies, that was not an option before the year 2000. The Citizens' Right to Work Act changed the rules about filing and suspending benefits and claiming spousal benefits only. So these strategies were not in the public consciousness because they weren't always there. These were some of these laws that have been changed along the way.
The let's go into the thought around Medicare costs and how they relate to Social Security, and I guess really how that also relates back to your AGI, which can impact your Medicare. And you're also a Medicare expert, and we'd love to have you back to talk about Medicare, another complex subject. But let's talk about that relationship.
Okay. They're the ABCs of Medicare, since your audience is younger and they probably don't have a clue. Generally, when you turn 65, you are eligible to enroll in Medicare. A lot of people mistakenly think it's free. Furthest thing from the truth. Part A is covers hospitalization. That monthly premium is quote free because you have paid for it your whole life through your FICA taxes. Part B, which we think of as health insurance, doctor's fees, outpatient services, that has a monthly premium. Most retirees are paying $148.50 a month for Part B in 2021. But depending on your income, you might be paying $500 a month for that exact same service, and that's per person. So if both spouses are over 65, that's $1,000 a month just for Medicare Part B. Plus, your Medicare Part D drugs costs are also income tested, and then you still need a Medigap policy. So high end people could be spending $15,000 a year in just Medicare and Medigap premiums before they see a doctor or fill a prescription.
Because Part C and or D or a Medicare supplement plan will be the piece of the equation that pays the other 20% that Medicare doesn't pay, correct?
That's what the Medigap policy, they fills the gap. Now, this is what we call original Medicare, A plus B, a Medigap policy, and a drug policy D. Other people, and you hear this advertised all the time about Medicare Advantage plans.
Hmm.
They're also known as Medicare C. Think of it as the HMO of Medicare. It's all inclusive. They throw in extras that regular Medicare doesn't, like maybe hearing aids or vision tests or gym membership or extras like that. But the flip side, and it tends to be much cheaper. You pay your basic Medicare premium, but maybe no additional premiums. But you have to use their network of healthcare providers. So
That's the
it,
difference with Medicare Advantage. You may not get to choose your doctor.
right,
Yeah,
and it may be just for your geographic area. So if you're a snowbird, you probably don't want to do that because it might work in Minnesota, but not in
not in
Arizona.
Florida. The let's go into you had mentioned this early. We talked about this just briefly, but there is the worry that Social Security is this big pool of money and it's paying you. And yes, we've got some money coming in every 2 weeks from people's paychecks, but then it's also going out every month in the form of payments, and the the sink, if you will, that was full at one point is now draining and it's getting very close to empty, even though the faucet might be running still. people don't like the visual of, hey, the sink's empty.
Right. That
And that means,
overflow bucket is empty.
yeah. So where do we, and realistically, how much of a haircut should people count on, worry about, and or do you think it gets fixed?
I definitely think it gets fixed. Again, because Social Security is the most popular and successful federal program in history, and old people tend to vote in higher percentages than younger people. But when you look at right now, there are 64 million people receiving Social Security benefits, and a large percentage of them, that is the largest source of their retirement income, and in some cases, the only source of their retirement
What
income.
are the statistics around that? I hear often that it's like 2/3 of people or half of everyone in America that's getting social that really is their only income. Do you believe that? Is that
No, I
the way
would
it?
say the 2/3. It probably represents more than half of
Hmm.
their retirement income, and I say it's a smaller percentage. And the statistics are out there. I just don't remember, but I'd say it's less than a third where it's their only source of income. What happens is you find as people get older, something like 90% of the people 85 and older, Social Security is their only source of income because they've run through all of their other
Oh,
money,
wow. Okay.
but
Yeah.
Social Security is the one source that you can't outlive. And that's why it becomes such an important issue of, don't you want to get the biggest benefit you're going to get for the rest of your life?
Yeah.
Particularly
If you can afford to
if you
wait,
can afford it.
if you can afford it, it really is
But
wow.
but
I think that's probably the right way to think about it is that it's not the only source if you're 65 for many people, but it's the only source for a lot of people in their mid 80s who outlive the rest of their cushion.
think of it this way. Social Security is not so you can buy a boat at 62. It's so you're not eating cat food at 82.
Yeah. Okay. I like that. I'm going to make that as the headline of our show. Social Security is not to buy a boat at 62, it's to make sure you don't eat cat food when you're 82.
Right.
All right. So, and last question or two here, what are some actionable steps today? So, today we have, again, broad audience on Retire Sooner, anywhere from 25 to 65.
Okay.
And they're wondering, maybe the 65-year-old still hasn't started Social Security. What are some steps that anybody at any age we can take to, let's call it, prepare or maximize our Social Security?
First thing everybody should do is create their own Social Security account at ssa.gov. That stands for Social Security Administration.government. That will give you access 24/7 to your personalized estimated benefit statement that we all used to get in the mail until a few years ago. They
That's right. That
stopped.
went away. That's
Right? It was
gone,
too
or is it every
expensive.
5 years you get it in the mail, or is it
No,
totally online now?
it's pretty much totally gone unless you're 60 or older, have not collected benefits, and have not signed up for an online account. But it's a critical financial planning document because it shows you your annual earnings for your entire career, and more importantly, how much taxes you have paid for both Social Security and Medicare throughout your entire career. And while it's your employer's responsibility to report your earnings to the IRS and consequently to Social Security each year, it's your responsibility to check it at least once a year to make sure it's right. Because let's say that 2 years ago, you made $60,000 and there's a zero on your earnings report. The way your earnings are reported and the FICA taxes that you pay are going to affect your future benefits. Don't you want to make sure that your earnings are correct to get those benefits? The other thing is um, identity theft.
Hmm.
There's only one online account per Social Security number. Don't you want to make sure you're the one who set it up for your own Social Security number?
So Social Security, ss.gov, set up an account, make sure that there's no there's no income reporting missing,
Mm-hmm.
and make sure it's you that's getting reported.
Mm-hmm.
And for for some of our younger listeners on the Retire Sooner podcast, is it still 40 quarters to qualify? And is the math still, they take your top 35 years in average? Is that to just give us a quick general calculation how they arrive
Right.
at that number?
The first way to become eligible for Social Security benefits is you have to have at least 40 credits, and you can earn 4 credits a year. So essentially, you have to work at least 10 years to be eligible for Social Security. The actual amount you receive is based on what they call your lifetime earnings. They take the top 35 years of indexed earnings over your years. So if you'd made, I don't know, you made $20,000 in 1978, when they index it, it might be $60,000 now. But they take your lifetime earnings, they add up those top 35 years, they divide it by 35, they divide that by 12 to come out with your average index monthly earnings. And then they apply a formula to that. That's what your benefit would be if you claimed at your full retirement age. But then you can choose to claim earlier, as early as 62, but you're going to get less money because you're collecting 4 years early. And here's an example. If you live to average life expectancy, it doesn't matter if you collect smaller benefits early or full benefits at your full retirement age. It's all going to work out roughly the same over your lifetime. But the longer you live, the better off you would have been to delay
Mhm.
benefits.
Yeah, so
And
it's a
yeah,
longevity insurance policy to some
exactly.
extent. Yeah.
Again, not eating cat food at 82 is what it comes down. And to look at your audience, your younger audience, again, I tend to talk to people who are in or near retirement. And I'm dealing with people who generally have 66 as a full retirement age. And I talked about these strategies of one spouse delaying till 70. It makes perfect sense for them because, again, interest rates have been virtually zero for a decade, and they're going to get 8% a year to delay. Now, if someone who's born in 1960 or later, whose full retirement age is 67, says to me, well, should I wait till 70? And I'll say, I have no idea. It all depends on what interest rates are like at the time.
At the
If by the
time.
time you get to 67, interest rates are like 5%, probably not worth delaying. You might want to take the money and bank it.
Yeah.
But for right now, in a zero interest rate environment, it's a smoking hot deal.
The what about not working a full 35 years? If somebody works 25 and they don't get the full 35, how big of a penalty is that?
That's a great
Missing
question,
10 years.
because, well, let's say you work 20 years, Social Security is always going to divide by 35. So you've got 15 years of zeros. And
Hmm.
that means your average lifetime earnings and consequently your Social Security benefit is going to be smaller. But Social Security is a very progressive program in the sense that lifetime low earners get a higher replacement rate. They are probably going to get about 40% of their pre retirement earnings, as opposed to you and I, we might only get maybe 25%. Our dollar amounts are going to be higher because our income, our lifetime income was higher, but it's going to represent a smaller percentage of our working year income compared to lower income people. So really, working poor, Social Security is going to replace a chunk of their earnings, and for a lot of those people, that's all they're going to have. It was never designed to be the sole source of retirement, but for many people, it is.
So again, Social Security though not going to run out completely. You think for your constituency, let's say someone in their 60s at age 85, you can say to them with comfort, look, you might be getting 2,000 a month in social today. Worst case scenario, well, what you've said is Congress will fix it. But if they don't and they allow the train to go right through the brick wall, even then, the math is that you would still end up getting around 80% of what you were currently getting.
Well, first of all, Congress very seldom does things retroactively.
Hmm.
So I think people who are receiving benefits should be fairly confident that those benefits are going to continue, even though, in theory, if the trust funds ran dry and there was only enough FICA revenue to pay 80% of promised benefits, technically Social Security can't pay any more than that. But Congress could say, all right, we're going to borrow money from the general fund until we fix it. That's a dangerous road because Social Security has always been self financing. Money coming in from payroll taxes is what pays benefits. But I think if push came to shove and they're looking at 64 million people taking a 20% cut of benefits, I don't think Congress is going to do that. I think they're going to say, we're going to fill in the gaps until we figure this out.
Yeah, if you put it in that context, you think of 64 million people
And
getting
that's
a pay
today.
cut.
Yeah.
Yeah, getting
Yeah.
a pay cut. Whoever's in office is no longer in office,
Right.
right?
Right. Now,
Particularly in a world where politicians seem to love to just pay, 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 pay.
for your younger audience, and this is, I wish I had the URL to give you, but there are all these software companies that help with Social Security claiming decisions. And one of them is called Covisum, Covisum. If you go to covisum.com, they have a free Social Security calculator that tells you what would happen if your benefits were cut by 25, 20% to show you what the impact would be and basically what that would do to your lifetime Social Security income. And the bottom line in most cases is, yeah, this would hurt, but you're still going to be better off waiting. Because if you claimed your benefits early at 62 and you get a 25% cut, you're going to have a heck of a lot less money than if you claimed it at 67 or 70 and took a 25% cut. It's a
Covisum.
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 Interesting. Okay, we'll do a link
And
to that.
it's designed for consumers to use. It's a free thing. And again, the bottom line is, yeah, it's unlikely, and yes, it would hurt, but I tell people that claiming benefits at 62 because they're afraid the system's going to run out of money is like cashing out of your portfolio in a down market. The only thing you've guaranteed is you've locked in a loss.
Mm,
If you need the money, go ahead and
go
take it,
ahead.
but don't take it because you're afraid it's going to run out.
Ooh, I'm going to leave it there. I love that. Don't take it just because you think it's going to run out. That's not the strategy. It's if you need it, take it.
Right.
Don't take it just because you think it's going to run out, because that's probably not going to happen for somebody getting benefits.